Parallel testing is a process that executes two or more test scripts at the same time. Data providers allow us to perform data-driven testing. With parallel testing, our automation code can be set up to run each test in more than one browser, more than one operating system, and more than one device. One of the benefits of parallel testing is to reduce execution time. With data providers, we are allowed to send as much data as we want to our test script. For parallel testing, the testng.xml file has a parallel attribute that can be set to classes, methods, or tests. These three values determine how our tests are going to execute in parallel. I will also demo threadPoolSize and invocationCount. For data-driven testing, we need a data provider annotation. In addition to the data provider annotation, our test script requires a data provider attribute or a data provider class attribute. A data provider attribute allows us to send data from the same class. The data provider class attribute allows us to send data from a different class. All of the code will be on GitHub. Now, let's get into our parallel testing. First, we create a class. So let me open up IntelliJ, the IDE, then right-click Demo testng, new Java class. Name is parallel. Let me do it one more time. New Java class. Somehow it went away. Parallel testing is the name of the class. I'm going to now write web driver. Also insert some lines. No, let me put that back up and insert lines after the curly brace. Then import web driver. At this point, we're going to set up our test by writing @ before method, which is one of the testng configuration annotations. Public void setup. Now we write web driver manager .chrome driver .setup. Now create an instance of Chrome driver by writing driver equals new Chrome driver. The next step is to now tear down our test with the testng after method annotation. Public void tear down. Driver.quit is the method we need to tear down and close the browsers. Now, for our parallel test, we will load the page and print the thread ID. Let's go to our application under test, which is Selenium Playground by LambdaTest. I'm going to click jQuery date picker, then copy the URL, go back to the IDE, and begin the test by writing public void, and let's name this test_jQuery date picker. I'm going to now load the page with driver.get, then paste in the URL. For the print statement, let's make it thread.currentThread.getID. I'm going to put the next part on the next line so we can see everything within the screen. The name of the page is jQuery date picker page. Bingo. To break down this statement, we see thread.currentThread.getID. Thread allows our program to operate efficiently by performing more than one thing at the same time. Current thread is a static method that returns a reference to the current thread object. getID returns the identifier of the current thread. Let's create one more test. How about list box, date list filter? I'm going to copy this URL, then go back for our next test. @test public void test2 underscore data list filter. Also load this page with driver.get, pass in the URL. Let's go back to test 1 and copy this URL. Copy this print statement. And I'm going to use the same information for test 2. But I'm going to update jQuery date page picker, jQuery date picker to data list filter page. And now what we're going to do at this point is create our testng.xml file to run our tests in parallel. Let's go back to the project, right click, new, testng. The name of this XML file will be testng underscore parallel .xml. Bingo. The suite name will be parallel testing. We create our test in parallel. By writing this parallel attribute, we have options in alphabetical order for classes, false, instances, methods, none, test, and true. We are going to use classes, methods, and test. Let's start with methods. Also implement thread count equal to 2. Parallel decides if the testng will run different threads for this suite. Since parallel is set to methods, that means each method might run in different threads, although they are in the same test tag. Thread count is the number of threads to use when we run our test in parallel, and it's set to 2. Let's add test, the test tag, and the name is required, and the name will be parallel execution. Next is classes, and within the classes tag we write class. Bingo. Now when I run after this part, you're going to see the taskbar show 2 Chrome icons. Let's finish setting this up. We start with the package, which is demo testng, then the name of the class, and the name of the class is parallel testing. Now I'm going to run and watch and see how parallel testing run, and watch for the 2 icons in the taskbar. The run window, it also shows both executions, test 2 and test 1. In the console, we should see 2 print statements with different thread IDs. Bingo. Thread ID 16 and thread ID 15 before the page name of data list filter page and jQuery date picker page. Next, we're going to change the parallel value to classes. Setting parallel to classes will execute each class at the same time. Let's create a class, a new class, to show you this example. So we have parallel test. I'm going to refactor this test and rename it to parallel testing 1. So when I copy this test, it's going to refactor the testng.xml file. I'm going to copy parallel testing 1, then paste it. Then rename parallel testing 1 to parallel testing 2. So now we have our new class. And I'm going to continue. In the testng.xml file, we see it has been refactored to parallel testing 1. So now we have our two classes. Let's go back to the AUT. And we're going to look at another one. How about alerts and modal? And how about we use bootstrap alerts as the next one? Alerts and modals, bootstrap alerts. And with this, I'm going to copy the URL, then go back to our IDE, or to the IDE. Now, for the second test, I'm going to change test 1 to test 3, then rename it to bootstrap alerts, and also paste in the URL. Replace the one we have and paste in the new URL. Also, must update the page. The name from jQuery date picker to bootstrap alert message page. Now, we are finished with test 3. For test 4, let's go and find another URL. How about others? And then the drag and drop page. Copy this URL, go back to the IDE, change test 4 data list filter to drag and drop range slider. How about drag drop? And replace this URL with the one we just copied, drag and drop demo. Also, I'm going to update the page, the print statement, to show drag and drop range slider page. At this point, I can go back to the testng.xml file, and I'm going to add the new class by changing parallel testing 1 to parallel testing 2. Now, let's run. And watch the taskbar again. You should see two browser icons show up. Bingo. Now let's look at the console. Both classes. Bingo. Okay, in the console, we see the print statements. We see thread ID before the page, bootstrap alert message page. Thread ID 18, jQuery date picker page. 19 is the thread ID, and that is drag and drop range slider page, followed by thread ID 18, data list filter page. We see a thread ID before each page name, and that's how we expect. It only showed two different thread IDs, thread ID 18 and thread ID 19 for all of the print statements. Okay, so now let's update the test, the parallel to test. Bingo. Test means only methods in the same test are going to run in the same thread. We will use the same two classes but create a new test by copying this first test. And before I copy, let me rename this here to first test. Copy all the way to the end test tag and paste. Change first test to second test. Bingo. Now, this time in the run window, you will see both tests execute at the same time with two different browser icons in the taskbar. And you will see a lot of tests show up when this execution finishes. You see the icons in the taskbar? And I think that is almost finished. It's a lot of tests. Okay, so let's look at the console. Thread ID 18 and 19. 19, we're seeing a lot of print statements with thread ID 18 and 19. Bingo. Now, let's look at a couple of attributes for the test annotation. How about we go to parallel testing 2 for the test 3 method. I'm going to write threadPoolSize equal to 3, comma, invocationCount equal to 4. InvocationCount can be used for load testing, but for this example, we're going to use it to demonstrate a multi-threaded environment. A project will use this attribute to invoke different methods to determine if the code is multi-thread safe. threadPoolSize depends on the environment, and it creates a thread pool to execute our test method by one thread. Let's run this class, and I will start from the class level by running this class, and we should see 5 tests show up. Test 3 will have 4 iterations, and test 4 will have 1 iteration. So that comes to us seeing 4 different tests show up. And we'll see in the console if it has 5 tests or not. Scroll, and we see 5 tests in the run window. It shows 4 for test 3 and 1 for test 4. But let's keep on scrolling in the console to see if it shows us the same. Okay, this is 3 tests for Bootstrap alert message page. 1 more for Bootstrap alert message page. So that's 4 for test 3. And it has thread ID of 17, 15, 16. Yes, 3 different IDs. Let's keep on scrolling for the next test, and 1 thread ID for drag and drop. So that's our 5 tests. 4 iterations for test 3 and 1 iteration for test 4. The console shows the correct number of thread IDs and for the pages. That's it for parallel testing. Now let's perform data-driven testing with data providers. Let's go to the IDE, IntelliJ, right-click the demo testng package, new Java class. The name will be Data Providers Test. After adding the class, I'm going to write WebDriver. Also insert some lines, then import WebDriver. After importing WebDriver, the next step is to set up our test with the testng before method annotation. Public void set up. WebDriver manager .ChromeDriver.setup. The next step is to create an instance of ChromeDriver with new driver equals new ChromeDriver. This time I will maximize the browser with driver.manage.window.maximize. After maximizing the browser, let's go to our AUT. And this time, let's go to input forms. Ajax form submit. We're going to enter a name, comment, then click the submit button. However, we are going to create our code to perform data-driven testing by entering more than one name and entering more than one comment. In the IDE, let's write the test. After the data provider annotation, this here is the data provider annotation at data provider. The purpose of data provider annotation is to return values to the test method. Those values will be returned as Java objects. Therefore, we write public, and we're going to write object with 2 square brackets. The name of the method will be Ajax data. Now, we are going to, on the next line, we're going to write object, 2 square brackets again, data equals new object. Let's add a 2 inside of these square brackets. The number 2 inside of the square brackets indicate this is an array of 2 object references. Next, we're going to write data in 2 square brackets again. Inside this square bracket, I'm going to add a, and then I'm going to add a 1. 0 and 1. This will be the information for the name. The name will be, how about Joe Doe? Next, I will write data, 2 more square brackets. This time, I'm going to write 0, 1. So I apologize. This is supposed to be 0, 0. This time, I'm going to write the comment, and the comment is tester, how about Joe Doe for the comment. On the next line, I'm writing 2 more square brackets, but this will be data 1, 0. The name is Jane Doe. And for the comment, I'm going to write 1, 1. The comment, tester Jane Doe. Bingo. And we're going to return the data. This example has an array of string values, only string values, but we can also store any type of value like a Boolean or an integer. That's all we need to pass more than one test data set to the test method. So for the test method, I'm going to write the test annotation. Now we provide the data provider attribute equal to the data provider annotation name, which is Ajax data. And let me show you the name of the data, the name of the data provider annotation. The name is Ajax data. And I pass in that name to the data provider attribute, Ajax data. The data provider attribute connects the data provider annotation to the test method. This is how both methods talk to each other. Let's write public void test Ajax form. We're going to pass in the string name and string comment. Also print the name and comment. Name, and then we're going to write name as the argument. Do the same for comment. And write comment as the argument. I'm going to add a few more spaces so the name and comment lines up with each other. Now, let's get the values for our test script. by going back to the AUT, application under test, inspect name, and we see it has an ID value of title. Inspect comment. It has an ID value of description. Let's also inspect the button. We see it has an ID value of btn-submit. Now, I've already copied the URL. Let's go back to the IDE so we can load the page with driver.findElement, driver.get to load the page and paste in the value. I apologize. I copied the URL, but then I came back and also copied Ajax data. So let's go back to the AUT and copy the URL. Then paste in the URL to load the page. For entering a name, we write driver.findElement by ID, and the value of ID was title. And for title, the name, we're going to send keys to enter the data. And we pass in name. Next, we're going to enter a comment by writing driver.findElement by ID, and the value for ID was description. Send keys. Then pass in comment as the argument. Last is the button. And with the button, we write driver.findElement by ID, and I believe the value was btn-submit. And with buttons, we click. Bingo. Now, let's run. We should see two browser icons in the taskbar. I just saw name Joe Doe. This shows Jane Doe. I'm going to close the browsers manually because I did not write driver.quit, because I wanted you to see that this here shows name as Jane Doe and the comment shows tester Jane Doe. I'm going to close this. The next AUT shows Joe Doe as a name and comment as tester Joe Doe. So that's how we perform data-driven testing. Let's look at the console. It shows name Joe Doe, comment tester Joe Doe. Scroll down some more and we see name as Jane Doe and comment as tester Jane Doe. Both pass in the run window. As a recap, the Ajax data method supplies data to the test Ajax form method, and the test Ajax form method is the test method. The data provider annotation provide two benefits at the same time. The first benefit is to pass an unlimited number of values to the test method. There is no limit to the number of values, and any type of value can be passed to the test method. The second benefit is to allow the test method to be invoked with different data sets. Each set would run and have its own test results. Notice the difference between the data provider annotation and the data provider attribute. The data provider annotation has an uppercase D, while the data provider attribute has a lowercase d. The data-driven testing was provided in the same class using the data provider attribute. Next, I will show you how to perform data-driven testing outside the same class. So to perform that, let's go to the testng library because I want to show you the information. Now, the data provider attribute class, the data provider class attribute allows us to separate the test method from the data provider into different classes. In the testng library, let me scroll down to the testng package, bingo. And under annotations, we see data provider right here. That's the annotation. If I scroll down to the test, we see it has a data provider attribute and data provider class attribute. That's what we're going to pass into the test annotation using the data provider class attribute next. But first, let's walk through the application for our test. How about we go back to input form page. Let's go back to input form submit. Let's use this one. And on this page, all of the fields are required because it shows an asterisk beside each field name. The test script would enter a name and email. We're not going to click the submit button because the fields are required, but this should be enough data for us to perform data-driven testing. Let's go back to the IDE, and I'm going to create a new class by right-clicking Demo testng, new Java class. The name will be Data Provider Only. And for this here, I'm going to begin by inserting a line, then writing Data Provider Annotation. Then I'm going to write public static object and pass in those square brackets. The name of this method will be input data. And I'm going to write object, pass in those square brackets again to show it is an array. Data equals new object. And I'm going to pass in 2 inside of the square brackets. Now let's write our information for the data to perform data-driven testing. First, I'm going to write data in the square brackets for 0 for each one. The name, let's go ahead and just add Joe to repeat like we did in the last one. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to tab 3 times, and I'm going to write some more square brackets prefixed by data. 0, and this time I will add a 1. And for this here, I'm going to add the email of joe@gmail.com. For the second data set, I'm going to pass in 1, 0 equal to Jane. Data 1, 1, and the email for Jane will be jane@gmail.com, and return the data. Bingo. I just thought about something. You know how I said we can pass any type of data? Let's also pass in an integer. So at the end, I'm going to write data in 2 more square brackets, and with that, I'm going to pass in a 0. I gotta take out the num is on. So I'm going to pass in, okay, I'm probably with my laptop. There I go. I apologize about that. 0, and I'm going to pass in a 2. And the integer value, let's add 1. I'm going to do the same on this next line. 1 for the first square brackets, then a 2. And I will pass in 2 for the integer value. Let's also update the array. The last one, let's make it a 3. So the number 2 represents the number of rows, while 3 represents the number of columns. There are 2 rows, 1, 2, but 3 columns. 1 column, the second column for the email, and the third one has the integer values. There is one more concept we have for the option of providing a name for the data provider annotation. For example, we can write name equals input hyphen provider. It is not required, but it is a concept that we can follow if we want to provide a name for the data provider annotation. For the test, let's go back to data providers test class. And I will add one more test. And this is where we implement the data provider class attribute. It's equal to the class name, which is data provider. Gotta spell it right. Data provider only dot class. At this point, we can include the other attribute, which is comma data provider. It can be the name of the data provider method or the data provider annotation. Now, in the last test, we used the data provider name, Ajax data, here. This time, let's use the name of the input provider. So I'm going back to data providers test, and this time I will write input hyphen provider. Bingo. That's the name of the data provider and not the method name. So I'm going to start with public void test input fields. I will pass in string for the name, string for the email. Last, it would be an integer, and I would name it input number. Bingo. Let's make some print statements. First, it will be input number. The second print statement will be name. And I'm going to pass in name as an argument. For the last print statement, it will be email. Bingo. And let me add some spaces so it lines up together. Okay, now let's inspect the elements on the application under test. Inspect name, and we see it has an ID value of name. Let's inspect the email field, and it has an ID value of input email 4. That's cool. Okay, so I'm going to copy the URL, then go back to the IDE, and we're going to load the page with driver.get. Pass in the URL. At this point, name is the next one that we're going to find. Next, driver.findElement by ID, pass in the value of name. .send keys, and the keys we're going to send, name, pass in as the argument. After name, we're going to write driver.findElement by ID, and the value was, I think it was input email 4. Send keys, pass in email. Now let's run. In the application, we should see Jane and Joe as the name. I see Joe at Gmail, and I see Jane at gmail.com. Jane for the name, Jane at gmail.com. Going to close this, and we see Joe at gmail.com. Both tests looks good, and both tests pass. And if I expand this, we see it has its own value, data sets, Joe at gmail.com and Jane at gmail.com. Plus, it shows the values in the console. Input 1, name is Joe, email is joe at gmail.com, and the same for input number 2. Name is Jane, email is jane at gmail.com. That's it for parallel testing and data-driven testing. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video for cross-browser testing using testng and Cloud Selenium Grid. If you would like to learn more, then make sure to follow the blogs at www.lambdatest.com/blog and community.lambdatest.com. In addition to the blogs, you can earn a certification at www.lambdatest.com/certifications. Get educated, get recognized.